I'm hitting the record button now. So for some of you who have colleagues who wish to be a part of this conversation, or you would like to listen to it again, we will be doing a follow-up communication where you'll have an opportunity to have the recording as well as the deck. And I think we may even have a handout that will go out as well to everybody who's registered for this call. So I'm going to go ahead and get things started. We're at 3:03 now. And once again, I want to say I'm really delighted that all of you have joined us. I'm Gregory Jackson. For those of you who don't know, I'm Associate Director for Membership and Partnership at NAEP. I'm based in New York City. So if you do hear some noise or commotion, it's just the neighbors doing their thing. But while we're getting started with these first few slides, before we introduce the guests, I would like for you to please use the chat to indicate what state you're from and what organization that you may be representing. And if you're representing just yourself, you can put self. But please put it in the chat so that we can all see who's on this call and where you're from. And so while you're doing that, I just want to let you know these meetings are what we call M2M or member-to-member connections. And you can see it represented here on this slide. Our member engagement goal is to support members through something we call the 3 keys, which is discovery, connection, and then taking action. And they're highlighted here. Discover, which is exchanging knowledge about what works and what doesn't. Connect, which is adapting equity solutions that create and sustain new partnerships as needed. And taking action, which is implementing solutions, monitoring progress through policy solutions, and continually improve through advocacy. So that's the theme for what we do with member engagement within NAEP. I'm trying to hit the next slide, but I got a lot of things going. Hold on a second while I move some things. Hold on a second. I'm letting people in the waiting room. Okay. So here's the agenda. Thank you for your patience. We're going to start off with what brings us here, and that's just going to be another prompt I'm going to ask folks to respond to in the chat. We're going to walk through, I'm going to do the 2-cent tour of member engagement, and then we're going to introduce our guests and get started with our fireside chat. There's going to be an opportunity for Q&A, and that includes this interactive component, which is what's your experience been with this particular topic? And then when we wrap things up, I'm going to ask you to save the date, November 15th, for our next in our members series, Empowering Adult Learners, Lifelong Education and Upskilling. So this is your first prompt or reflection item. You can put your response in the chat if you'd like, or it's just something to think about. What brings us here? For many of us, the National Summit for Educational Equity is where this work began. Many of us, or many of you have learned about NAEP through the summit. Some of you have come through other manifestations. But what I want to ask is, what resonates with you about fostering cultural competence in STEM? And just take a moment to do that, and feel free to share that in the chat so some of us might be able to learn about where you're coming from with this particular topic. And I'll just give you like 30 seconds or less just to think about that and consider what resonates with you about this particular topic, fostering cultural competence in STEM. And please feel free to share in the chat. Okay. So I'm just going to spend a moment talking about NAEP opportunities. Before I do so, I want to acknowledge Kathy Albin, who is the chair of the Member Engagement Committee for NAEP. She is from Spokane, Washington, has been involved with NAEP many years through our EE STEM Academy, among other things, and serves on the NAEP Executive Committee. I want to acknowledge Kathy. Kathy, are you on the line?
I don't see her at this time, Gregory.
You don't? Okay. Well, then I will acknowledge Dr. Lou Hargrave, who represents, I see, and the reason I'm saying that is I see your face, Dr. Lou. So that's your fault for being on camera. I just want to acknowledge our foundation board chair, Dr. Lou. Dr. Lou, would you want to just share a few words or some thoughts?
I'm just thankful to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to the information to be shared.
Great, thank you. So this meeting is part of something we call NAEP engagement, and NAEP engagement comes in different forms. This is our 1-hour form, which are web-based events, our member series, and other kinds of interactive opportunities for NAEP members. We're going to be launching our refresh of our NAEP member website on our national website, so you can learn about affinity groups and also serving on NAEP committees that help deliver the work of this organization. We also do one-day events, things like the NAEP Annual Summit are 1-day plus events. And so these are in-person opportunities to become engaged with NAEP and to connect with other members in this community. And then we have long-term projects, and that goes to the NAEP committees that I refer to in affinity groups. These are 6 months or more, and so when you become engaged with those, you join a committee, you can play a key role in helping to formulate things like the NAEP Summit, planning the NAEP Summit, and other kinds of particular affinity areas like serving students with disabilities, workforce development, and just a range of areas. And you'll see that on the website, and you'll hear about it when we launch the refresh of the member webpage coming soon. Anyway, when you join a committee, this is just a brief overview. They're cross-functional, meaning you have an opportunity to interact on a committee with the NAEP Executive Committee and other folks from around the country with a similar interest. They're all challenge-focused, and they're all directed around outcomes. They're all time-bound and outcome-driven. And the NAEP staff, someone like myself, will provide the scaffolding, meaning we'll organize the meetings, the Zoom meetings, and assist with note-taking, all those other kinds of things using Google platforms. So we're there to serve you, so to make this process work efficiently. So that's the nickel tour of NAEP. So I'm going to pass it over to our guests, and I'll turn it over to you, Brittany.
Thank you, Gregory, and nice to see so many friends in the room. I am always excited to see folks from all over the country, especially for something like fostering cultural competence. And so we decided to highlight our work here at NAEP by highlighting the work of the Center for Black Educator Development. I'm really excited to be joined here by the Assistant Director of High School Programs, Anshere Hines from the center. And she'll be sharing alongside me via a fireside chat. So we'll be very conversational, which means please don't be shy. Ask your questions in the chat. We'll make sure we try to weave them in as much as possible while we're in the flow of conversation to learn more about, one, the work of the center. They specifically work to repair the STEM teacher, the Black teacher pipeline, but also they work more broadly to increase cultural competence for all educators and to create a better and more safer environment and more welcoming and culture of belonging throughout all classrooms throughout the United States. And so, Gregory, you can stop sharing and I can unpin you for us to go ahead and get into conversation. So I will first take a moment. Anshere is wonderful and great, and we've had a moment to kind of connect before this, but I'll pause before we jump into conversation and see if you want to share anything more about yourself or your professional background.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here and to be able to share space with you all today and to talk about the work of the center, but also this work around STEM and thinking about how to engage in that in ways that are culturally relevant. So I knew really early that I wanted to be an educator. And I also knew, like around high school, that part of the thing that I thought would have the most impact is my ability to be able to contribute to what students are learning and the contents of what they're learning. So in high school, I made a decision like curriculum, I got to get into it. So that's what I have been doing now. I taught for about 5 years. I graduated, my undergraduate degree is from Howard University. I'm a humanities person. I did English and history, African American history, and then I went to the University of Pennsylvania to get my master's in education, culture, and society, looking specifically at how Black communities had organized themselves. Okay, come on now, HU, you know, had organized themselves in order to take a more proactive position in disrupting the canon of what's recognized as like knowledge that everybody needs, specifically when it comes to history. And we're seeing some of those fun things play out right now as far as the struggles around education and its direction and the implications of what students learn and the outcomes for our society and culture and nation regarding all of that. All of that really fascinates me. So again, I'm really excited to be able to be here in discussion with you all and continue this conversation.
Wonderful. And now you all see why we have her here with us today. I'm so grateful to have you, because this is a bigger, broader issue, right? We're here to talk about STEM and CTE, but as you mentioned, the culture of belonging goes far beyond just those parts of the ecosystem, right? And so I want to start off with some of the work that you all do specifically around cultural competence of all educators. So yes, the center focuses on the Black teacher pipeline. We know that's a critical piece of belonging, students seeing themselves reflected not only in their classroom environment, but also the examples that are offered. But you all are also thinking about how to support all educators, whether they identify with being Black or not, right? And so can you share more about that work and some of the impacts that you've seen from that level of intentionality?
Sure. I'll talk a little bit more about like my biographical experience and how I got into education and then pull it all the way through. But I came up in a program called Freedom Schools, which Children's Defense Fund is doing nationally. The Center for Black Educator Development, we have Freedom School Literacy Academy. But that space, being in that space as a young person who was in elementary school, then as a high school student who was given a leadership opportunity, then returning as a college student, then having my own site, then being this person who's now developing the curriculum, really shaped my values and how I thought about what it means to be a person who is dedicated to education and really taking that process seriously. Education as a process that involves like human development and like not just the information that goes into your head, but the way that the things that we learn and the things that we're socialized to understand in educational spaces have impact on the world around us and how we can be stewards of that in ways that feel responsible, but also when considering Black communities, help to create a better reality because of the society in which Black people currently exist in America and in other contexts. So what I think is important about the type of educator that we're trying to cultivate at the Center for Black Educator Development is that that educator is being given the tools and the knowledge to be able to see their educational work and the experience of their students through that lens, giving it this really relevant and rich grounding regarding why it is that we are spending this time together in this classroom space. It shouldn't be about this test, even though that's like the pull of education in a lot of ways. And people are really kind of concerned about the credentialization and like making sure that we're moving towards what the marks that they get and the scores that they get and the certificates that come out of this process. Displacing that for just a second to really consider what are we doing for these human beings that are coming through this system that touches everybody in our nation, and how are we making sure that that process gives them the tools that they need in order to survive this reality and become people who are going to be able to actualize their best, most liberated selves. So we've come up with a set of values that we try to institute through all of our programming, that I've built a lot of my programming around as the developer of the high school programming that we have. And the first one is really working to make sure that all educators that we encounter build and develop their knowledge of African and African American educational philosophy, because like I mentioned before, the curriculum that's chosen or that's put together or we've been historically handed has prioritized a certain narrative, prioritized a certain group of people as the ones who are the holders of all our knowledge and the source of our democratic processes and the knowers of everything that's good in the universe. And anybody else who's ever had a unique thought doesn't necessarily get the opportunity to be highlighted in that same way, which shapes, again, that narrative of how we understand knowledge and power and who are the people who have it and who are the people who don't. So what we're doing at the center is disrupting that. How do we think about who has thought about education specifically for and targeted towards Black people, and how do we tell their stories? How do we explore their ideas? How do we make sure that the educators who are coming out of this space are able to approach their work with that lens in place? Also, the other thing that we try to do with all educators is model for them and introduce them to education-based activism and that connection to communities. A school can be a community institution. It exists in a neighborhood if you are, teaching at a neighborhood school, but even if you aren't, schools are not separate from the context in which they exist, even though schools tend to like put up the walls. It's like, we're here in this sacred place and the things that are happening outside don't have relevance. But that's a strange setup, especially when you're inviting in people who live in the surrounding community to participate in what's happening indoors. So the other thing that we try to do and try to really ground educators in is making sure that they understand that their responsibility is not just to the four walls or the classroom or the students, is to the whole surrounding context and the people who you're going to encounter on your way into the building and the social situations that are happening around the students when they leave. Like, we think about how we can show up not just as educators within the building, but as people who are concerned about educational issues and just social issues wherever they show up, so that we can make sure, again, that the students that we are stewarding and are responsible for are participate or have the opportunity to participate in a process that allows for their full human development. So, long answer, but
No, perfect
be
answer.
comprehensive.
No, because first of all, we need to know what the values that you're grounding your work are. And then also, when thinking about everyone kind of being a learner of experience that may or may not mirror their own, I think is a key component of what we call cultural competency. And I saw someone said in the chat, I'm interested in moving beyond cultural competency and disrupting systems that don't serve all students who conform to dominant cultural standards. I think that this idea of everyone being in a position to have to get curious and to ask questions from a holistic and not like a anthropological approach, right? But instead one of understanding. How can I better understand that when your sister did your braids, she actually probably knows geometry because she's doing math to figure out how to do your parts. Or the fact that when you leave from the school environment and you're rapping in the hallway, if that's what you want to do, you're counting bars, right? And so like you probably have a lot of math acumen, right? Seeing those cultural cues as assets instead of deficits, and also better understanding a culture to see where you can lean in as an educator to better support the genius and the brilliance in your classroom. And then there's something else that I want to kind of lean into a little bit that you shared, which is this idea of the school community or the community college or wherever you are not being an isolated context. Because a lot of us, I will say me, and anyone else can raise their hand, okay? I'll volunteer myself, but we get caught up in silos and bubbles, right? We're on panels and we're in this conversation and that conversation. But there's a whole cultural context that we have to be aware of, right? I can't enter the school community and think that you are somehow isolated from what you will leave and go face. And it is my responsibility as an educator, leader, person that is invested in your success as a student to really get smart about that, right? If the student's responsibility is learning whatever content you have, your responsibility is adapting the content to be able to permeate and reach them in ways that really they can carry forward throughout the rest of their educational career. And so I really loved what you shared there, because I think it's critical. And I think that contributes to belonging. This is kind of a meta way of cultivating belonging. A lot of people don't think of it automatically, but I think of when I was in a school context and how excited students would be if you came to the football games, or if you went and saw them on the weekend when they were doing folklorico dancing, or whatever the case may be, right? Supporting your students when they're showing up in their cultural context and learning from it, right? You don't have to get everything right. We said that a lot about Nate. If you're always getting it right, I can be sure you're probably getting it wrong, right? This is the pathway of learning and understanding. But if you really want to support your students, it's worth it, right? It's worthwhile.
Absolutely.
So I want to move a little bit more specifically into the CTE context. I see a lot of my CTE friends here in the room. Hey, okay. And specifically about the representation we have as educators. So Black teachers make up about 7.9% of public CTE teachers, compared to about 6.1% across all disciplines. And then 6.8% of CTE teachers are Hispanic or Latine, compared to 9.5% overall. Now, if you look at those numbers, and if you could hear how fast I was saying them, that means that Black teachers are slightly more represented in CTE than they are in the broader context, but it's still less than 10%. When we're thinking of CTE in STEM, we're thinking about that school environment, we're thinking about the ecosystem. Are there any specific barriers to that representation or opportunities to not keep it in a deficit that can contribute to more representation, both on the teacher side and then also just thinking about what that student experience is like when they have that educator too, if you want to lean in there?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot here. I think I am going to start a little bit in the deficit space, but shift more towards some interventions that I've seen that I think work. What I've found is an issue that's not necessarily specific to STEM, but is going to really apply here, is that students, Black students in particular, are not often given the opportunity to be excellent, to strive for excellence, to achieve excellence in subjects. Given, in some contexts, the instability that can be created in the educational process if teachers are resigning or not showing up, or long-term substitutes or whatever, you already are in a space where you don't have a content subject area expertise teaching. So that creates a barrier just on by itself. But the other thing that I found, which was a little bit discouraging, I come from an educator family, just for a little bit of context. So my father is a STEM guy. We wrestle about it all the time. It's a humanities versus STEM house in our house. But he worked at a private school for a while, and what he was finding was that, you know, the school was mostly non-Black, just to be a little bit more transparent about it. And so he inquired about like why that was the case, and what he found was that in order to get into the private school, the students had to take a certain level of, they had to have a certain level of like math and STEM credits. And for most of the schools surrounding, these classes weren't even offered. So students would never be able to apply because the credits are not there for them to even take. So there's an opportunity gap there that creates these challenges where we're not even giving students opportunities to really start to step into being able to enter the field. So he got together with some folks. They created an intervention. They created a program where they would tutor these students so that they could pass this exam and still get in, even though they didn't have the credits. So some of that is kind of that autonomous self-determination that's required in spaces. If you want to start to knock down the structures that are keeping young people out of STEM, you got to start to innovate in ways that are going to disrupt the systems that exist. As Ashley pointed out, like there are actual challenges. And if we know them, if we discover that they're there, it's on us to start to try to dismantle them. So that's one thing I would say about the STEM piece. The other thing is science. I think STEM tries to be like apolitical and really shows up as like the objective truth, but that's not the case. So I think what feels challenging sometimes when getting students to invest in STEM, or like getting people to care about STEM, is like that age-old question, like, why do we have to take math? Like, what's the point? I'm never going to use it. It doesn't have any relevance. And I had this debate with my little brother. And what I shared with him is that, you know, the reasons that people will usually give for not doing STEM or not taking math or whatever, or excuse me, the reason why you need it is because you're not going to be able to have a calculator around, you know, math just matters, like an empty answer. But what we talked about was that you don't want to be somebody who shows up in the world and doesn't have the capacity to think critically. Math or STEM and science is the process of being able to analyze issues and solve problems. That's the practice. That's what the numbers are for. They're just representations, which is like an algebraic concept. But like these quantities represent things, and it goes beyond the numbers on the page. Like if you develop that muscle, then you can start to apply it in the world around you. And that's the relevance. Like you want to be able to strengthen that, because what will happen if you can't do it, then somebody else will do it for you. And that becomes the political component that gets scary. And in some contexts has like actual health implications. Like if we think about STEM and science and some of the outcomes for like Black people in medicine and some of the things that have happened and some of the like the Black maternal health, or like, you know, the mental health, like things that are not, there are a lot of Black people in the room. So it's hard to, if you don't have that context, or if you're not a person in science who's lending yourself the energy to think about that, nobody will ever bring it up in the conversation. So we'll continue to have these imbalances that perpetuate injustice, and in some cases like contribute to like people not getting the care that they need. And that can go across all sorts of different fields. When we were in the pandemic, access to technology was an issue. Like if people have to learn from home, who are the people who are more likely to be able to do that? Why aren't we thinking about that? That's the cultural competence that we have to kind of get on the ground with, and thinking about like the STEM related issues and how we're creating interventions that allow people to get the things that they need. So that would be some of the things that I would like to raise here and talking about, like, how do we become more STEM competent? It's about thinking about how math is applied, not just like, oh, math is all around us, I see it everywhere. It's the critical thinking and problem solving part. And then how issues that come up in these STEM related fields have actual tangible outcomes in people's lives, and how we can cultivate young people to be able to address that. So I'm 100% in favor of a CTE pathway that's going to allow us to address that, but there's some structural issues on the floor: access, quality educators, making sure students have access to the classes, making sure they understand the relevance, and making sure that we're giving them a fighting chance to be able to learn the math that will ultimately ensure the success of the rest of the STEM CTE pipeline. There's another thing I want to say, but I'm gonna pause. I'm gonna stop there because I feel like I've been going on.
No, that's the purpose of a fireside chat. We're here to learn from your lived experience and from your expertise in the space. And also, I just have to say, it's really important for folks to understand that these structural pieces, everything that has built can begin again, that has been built, right? Like we can reimagine our structures, we can reimagine our systems in a way that really centers the humanity of everyone, which is what I hear you saying, right? Like, is my humanity showing up in this space? No adult goes somewhere without knowing their purpose for being there, but we expect for students to just want to seek knowledge and internalize it, right? And I can tell you're a like-minded educator in that I always explain things to my students. I just had a mentee not too long ago. They're an educator now, they're teaching 5th grade. And they said, they called me by my maiden name, and they said, you know, you always explain things to us. I now understand how patient you must have been to explain everything. But it's because I wanted them to get the content. It's because I know you're brilliant enough to access my high expectations for you, which is something I also heard you say. And if we presume something about your cultural context and we lower the bar for you because we think, oh, well, you have it so hard, right? And I'm just being very frank in this space, you know, then I'm not really able to see the genius that you are because I'm making presumptions about who you are. And instead, what you're saying is, let's shift that narrative and that paradigm to say, I know you're brilliant. And I might not be able to see the full expansiveness of it because of what I have experienced in my life, but I'm going to hold enough space and I'm going to explain things and I'm going to create the pathways for you to be able to demonstrate that to me. And I'm not going to be a barrier. I'm going to be someone who opens up the space. And we do that by speaking directly to the structures that get in the way. So you mentioned about the math pathway, and everyone from my team knows I'm going to have to mention the example because we've done a lot of work in Texas. And there's one particular Stony Point Learning Community in Central Texas that has really strong outcomes after we partnered with them for a year-long project to really look at their math pathway, their advanced math pathway. They were not seeing enough representation throughout it. And what we found was that instead of being able to opt out, students were having to opt in. So if they're
Mm,
having to opt in and having to test to a certain level to be able to access advanced math, if I'm not in algebra by 8th grade, can I access a STEM pathway with
right.
fidelity? Maybe or maybe not, right? I might have to find an alternate route. If I decide I want to be a doctor and I know I need to take AP Calc by senior year, then am I actually on a pathway that allows me to have that based on the classes available in my area? Based on if someone recommended me for the course. There are some districts that require recommendations for advanced level math or advanced courses. And so these are some of the structural barriers that get in the way. So belonging is, of course, what we want, but part of cultural competency is understanding what's getting in the way for your culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is stopping you from being able to do something? Is it something beyond your control? And 9 times out of 10, that's going to be the case. So I really appreciate you raising that example. I especially appreciate you mentioning autonomous self-determination. I tell people all the time, children experiencing poverty are the geniuses that no one else can see. You can figure out
Mm-hmm.
how to feed your family for a week off of $15, you are a genius.
Mm-hmm.
Full stop,
Absolutely.
right? And so we
Absolutely.
need to figure out how to support those students being able to access STEM pathways, because I am convinced that the solution to a lot of our problems lives in the minds of people that do not have access to those classrooms. And so thank you so much for mentioning that.
For
So
sure.
before did you remember what you were going to say before I move us
Yeah, I
forward?
do. I
I
do
know
want
you
to
did.
just add on. No, it's really good. I think it's going to flow really beautifully. I pulled it up as you were talking, but there's this Lisa Delpit wrote this
Oh,
article.
yes.
She wrote a chapter in this, you know, love her, love her.
Love her.
But she wrote this chapter in a book called Quality Education as a Constitutional Right, which I would highly recommend to everyone here. Also, Bob Moses is one of the editors on it, and I'm not sure how familiar people are with Bob Moses, but he created a program. He wrote a book called Radical Equations, but he created a program that was designed to help develop students' capacity and skill in algebra, but was also like social change focused because he was an organizer in the 60s during the civil rights movement and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So that, there it is. Oh, come on, y'all. This is wonderful. This work, like, you know, STEM is not apolitical. Like, and teaching people again how to engage in that critical thinking process with using numbers or using social issues. The point is to strengthen the muscles so people can think critically and move toward change. But the point about excellence, like, or the point about like the expectations Lisa Delpit writes about in this chapter, her chapter is Culturally Responsive Pedagogies, Lessons from Teachers. She talks about this mathematics teacher named Dr. Abdulrahim Shabazz. And she says he successfully taught students who came to college with deficits in mathematics at 3 historically Black universities. Shout out to all the HBCUs in the chat. I see y'all. 109 of those students graduated with master's degrees in math. And nearly 50% of the African American PhD mathematicians in around 1990 were descendants of those 109 master students. How has he done this? She poses the question. Shabazz made it clear that SAT and ACT scores have almost no meaning for him. Instead, he has focused on a set of excellence level goals that have shaped his approach to dealing with all students. 2 of his goals are to teach understanding rather than merely to teach mathematical operations, and to give his students a sense of hope that they can become superior performers. Like, the system that students have to come through will really like beat you all the way down, depending on wherever you are. But you set up the students so that they can feel like they have the opportunity to be excellent, and then you help continue to move them toward that, even if they're showing up behind. Like, the part about teaching people with deficits who didn't have, you know, they're already coming with the struggle, which is not, you know, that's not an abnormal process. Moving those people to excellent performance, to me, that's the epitome of like being able to access education in ways that are culturally competent. Like, let's really dig into this and work through how I can connect to you, the human being, recognizing you fully and helping participate in the process of education with you. I think it's necessary.
Yeah. Seeing your students, right? That's what I hear from that. Do I see you enough to support you? Am I thinking through how to support your professional academic growth? I see we have the founder and CEO of Center for Black Educator Development in the room, Sharif El Makai. I'm going to spotlight you in a moment, Sharif. So get ready. When we do Q&A, you're coming to the stage. But I will definitely, when we're thinking about that, giving your students a sense of hope, that is not limited to any demographic, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think very often I had an educator that I worked with, and, he had what was it called? Like when you have the curly on the top and I'm gonna make a joke, like business in the front, fun in the back. Like he had a mullet. There we go. He had a mullet, and we were in middle school, and the kids used to just be like, "Oh, here comes Mr. So-and-so with his mullet," and the kids loved him. Mm-hmm. This was a white man in a predominantly Black and brown school. But what was so exceptional about him, or special, I would say, is that he said, "I see every student as a unique puzzle to solve." And not like they're a problem, but a puzzle. How can I lean in to their zone of genius to push them forward so they can go where they want to go? His outcomes were better than other teachers. And people kept asking, what is he doing? And you know what he would say? I listen. Simple as that. Kids will give you everything you need to support their growth. Are we listening enough to support that? And are we seeing them enough to see that? Okay, so exactly, Esperanza, it's about people. So I want to go ahead and spotlight Sharif so we can go ahead and transition to Q&A. I know from, oh wait, I pinned you. I didn't spotlight you. Hold on, let me fix this if I can figure out how. But I think when we're thinking about, this space and what people really want to learn and know, we want to emphasize to folks in this setting, NAEP is all about transparent conversations. And so as you all have questions about how to foster this, if you have questions specifically for Anshere or for Sharif, they're both here to answer your questions. I'm always here, but I'm always with y'all. And so please feel free to ask any questions about how you might bring this to your campus environment, or any of the questions here that Gregory has posed, in case those might be good starters for your questions. But we are as conversational as we can be with this number of folks. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we will be sure to reach them. But as we kind of get you ready for question and answer, I'll ask one final question specifically about the Teaching Academy CTE that the center has. I know you all do work specifically in the CTE space. And so I wanted to know if you all wanted to share any insights that extend to both STEM and CTE from the learning and from the community that you cultivated for your Teaching Academy CTE.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's happening for the young people is that they are really genuinely thrilled to have had the opportunity to engage in teaching. Like the cycle, like they're tripping about, wow, like I'm on the other end of this. Like it's my responsibility to share knowledge, and this is really special. Like just giving them the space to be able to start to practice it is doing something for them that I think is really beautiful, and that we knew in theory, but are currently seeing it in practice has been just phenomenal. But we had a student who just felt so thrilled. They were helping somebody with their algebra. And they were like, this was amazing. Like, and I play a special role in this because I'm not the teacher. Like the teacher of record is like this old person and they're all distant, but I'm here sitting with them. Like, here's another identity marker that we share, youth, not just our culture, but that access is making the learning easier for the people who are in that space. And I'm thankful to be able to fulfill that role. I'm humbled by the opportunity to get to do it, and I'm excited about the opportunity to do it. So I think that students are really just feeling, and this was actually named, we asked them outright, like what they were finding valuable about it. And one student shared that people never really, they don't ever consider what's happening with us. Like, we're just participants in it, the system of education. We don't have any agency, we don't have any thoughts, we're just moving through it at the whim of what everybody else thinks and wants and needs and expects. This opportunity where we have space to be able to say, here's what we're thinking, here's what we would like to contribute to, here's what we would like to prioritize, is shifting the way that we engage in our education as students, not just as potential future teachers or whatever else we desire to become. this opportunity has been valuable in itself, just to have the room to be able to use my voice in ways that really feel valuable and show that people are listening. So that's an insight that I think would be helpful. I don't know how many opportunities people are taking to engage in students this way and think critically with them, or just stop them in the hallway or wherever you are, but talk to them and give them then an opportunity to show that you listen to them.
Speaking of, we have a question specifically about that in the chat. How do you institutionalize marginalized student voice in your work, organizational practice, and decision making? NAEP is a big proponent of student and learner voice, and really centering that in decision making, and not in a tokenized way, but in a meaningful way, allowing them to lead the charge for what would undoubtedly impact them. So how do you all institutionalize including that voice in your work?
We've built it into our programming. We've built it into the curriculum. So that's one option. But even if they don't go full out, like if you don't have the space to structure something like that, what we are aiming for always is just opportunities for people to be in dialogue with each other. But usually it's a student-driven plan. Like it gets into like more of that activist organizing space. Like we're teaching them how to campaign. So you want to engage with the stakeholders around you. And it's not, the way that we do it is we take some of the power away, like, because it becomes on the responsibility of the institution to like open the doors. What we do is try to give it to the students. Like, we're going to get through the door. Like, so how do you want to do it? But the point again is to get people to be in dialogue with each other. So provide space for that. And then come with a plan. We work with our students so that there's like here's our goal, here's the action, the outcome we would like to see, here's how we're going to move through that. If you're going to engage students in this process and have it really have value and have impact on outcomes, you got to go through that whole line as well. Here are the issues, we would love to talk about them. Here are some things that we would like to act on based on our dialogue. Stay in that cyclical conversation and then implement. Like, that's how we get beyond just the representative tokenization of engaging student voice. You take it seriously, and then you start to act on the things that students are saying.
That was the part that I wanted to hear you say, because I knew you were going to say it. Acting on, right? There's so many focus groups and surveys and all kinds of things that we ask students for their opinion. And then where do they see the fruit of that effort, right? How do they know that that voice is actually impacting the decision-making process of those charged with their care? And I think that piece is critical. That is for all learners along the continuum. This is adult learners, this is K-12, this is all of it. Because if we are educating in a silo, then we're missing opportunities. So absolutely, thank you for that. Sharif, did you want to weigh in on that at all?
Yes, thank you. Sorry. Hi, Heinz. Hi, Brittany. Hi, everyone. Sorry I'm late. I was, on a panel, so I was excited to join this conversation. But I think that's is spot on. This idea of like, what do you do to not just listen to students, but actually hear? And I think an example of that is also how are we listening? How are they observing teachers of color being seen and heard? And so we just published a report that we did with Teach Plus. I was just trying to get the link to put it in the chat, and it's very interesting. And these are 100 students of color who are already saying that they are interested in leading their own classrooms one day. And one of the takeaways that was a consistent theme across these 100 students was that they are observing how teachers of color are being treated. And that's one of the things that gives them pause. And thank you. Listen, look at y'all so dope. And so, to be able to hear that directly from students, things that we knew, we hear it anecdotally, but for that to be a consistent, these are students from all over the country are saying like, hey, I'm a student of color. I want to be a teacher of color. And I don't want to be the colleague of some of my teachers because of how they treat my other teachers of color. Right. And so I think that's another just example of, being not only seen and heard, but it's consistent with educators of color. So being Black and brown in America is unfortunately synonymous with being Black and Brown in American Schools. There are a lot of similarities there, and we can extrapolate from that and say, like, okay, what can we do differently? But make sure we get feedback of, like, are we doing it differently? You know, do they see a difference? You know, I used to tell my teachers, like, hey, every kid knows when you got a new haircut, new bag, new shoes, maybe even a new relationship. But do they know that you went to a professional development? Do they know that you joined a book club? They should be able to see the difference. They should be able to, like, wow, you're teaching differently. Wow, like, I feel different in your classroom. Like, oh, I feel like more empowered, you know? And unfortunately, too often, they don't see that. They don't experience that.
Yeah, I think we bring up in some of our trainings that we offer a quote from James Baldwin: "I can't believe what you say because I see what you do."
I'll see what you
Right.
do. Yeah.
And
Yep.
so that is really something that we always have to be mindful of what students are seeing, and something that Asheray mentioned earlier about the example you offer with that math educator, or that math professor rather, and how they really supported students. That is especially relevant to me because I'm thinking of how much unfinished learning we've had. And just so everybody knows, I'm saying unfinished learning. You might also know that as learning loss, but I'm pushing us to think a little bit differently about what happened during COVID. If they couldn't finish, then how did they lose something they never had the chance to gain, right? And so when we're thinking about supporting students, especially in this current context, we have to have a sincere hope. We have to be thinking about how we're inviting our colleagues of color to be part of the environment. We have to think about what we're doing to really create a culture of care because of how the outcomes, right? We all have seen the data of what students are currently encountering and how they are really struggling in schools right now. And for us to really think differently about how excellent they can be in spite of the challenges that they've encountered as students who had their education disrupted in such a pronounced way, I think thinking about all of the ways we can push different levers to lead to their success, I think is really critical. I want to make sure that we are not taking up too much airtime. Y'all, keep in mind, we want to hear your questions. I know there are a few folks in this room. I will start to call, volunteer people to ask questions, just because I know there's curiosities that we all hold, especially as we're thinking about supporting our learners. But is there anything else that you wanted to share on that point, Asheray, especially about, you know, kind of that, I'm in alignment with Ashley in the chat, that idea of, like, students are not only knowing that you saw their hair get done, they also know that you don't talk to Miss Jenkins ever, right? Like they see that. And so what do we do to help people on that journey to getting to that point, to be more mindful about how they're engaging with their colleagues and how their students might perceive that?
Yeah, issues with education. So the thing about being a Black educator in a system like this is that you end up being the shield. You end up taking the hits as you're trying to, like, protect your children. So students are not oblivious to that. Like, you kind of take on, like, you know, you don't want your kids to see you struggle, but it's like all over you, you know? So not that you have to tell that narrative, but just, it would be great if institutions could work on creating better environments for all of the people of color in the space, because it's happening to everyone. Like, and the teacher kind of has to do this dual role of protecting the young people from the violence, but also, like, taking it on their own, taking on the children's and their own, as far as, like, the violence that's aimed at the children. So it gets hard. And I think overall, if we're going to be serious about creating educational spaces that people want to be a part of, we have to really get serious about being critical about the issues that exist in the space and address them for everyone. And some of that has to do with, again, taking the time to listen and set up. Like, teachers have professional developments. There are dedicated moments. We don't always want to prioritize the culture conversation, but it's necessary. It is the thing that ends up being, like, the foundation of all the other things that collapse on the top. Like, if we can't have the trust and the vulnerability and the openness to be able to dissect and create a better space, then it'll never be better. So dedicating the actual time to do it is necessary, I think, for the sake of the teachers, present and future. Yeah.
For the sake of the teachers, present and future, because future teachers, they're seeing a lot. And so I love that you all came out with that report, because we have to be mindful in teacher education programs and apprenticeship programs and anything that is building up that pipeline. I see Esperanza said, you know, massive attack, I stand in front of you, I'll take the force of the blow to be your protection. And so many educators of color have been in that space. I know I have, I'm sure both of y'all have, like I know we all have seen it. There's a question from Maria Lisa. If I pronounce your name wrong, I apologize. But she said, how do you model professionalism and protect individual identity in light of academic perceptions of what professionalism looks like hair, styles, clothing, jewelry, etc.? Oh, that's a juicy one. Okay, do you all want to take that first?
It's funny. I want to kick this question to you, but because I'm curious, what you gonna say?
Well, most people are probably curious about what I'm going to say, and I would say that I flip that. I protect my individual identity before I ascribe to the barriers and stringent nature of professionalism, right? I'm a professional by way of my expertise. I'm a professional by way of how I show up. If I want to show up in sweatpants and a t-shirt, I still know what I know in my mind. Now, with that being said, something that I always share with students is that I have that latitude and that freedom in this current moment. I did not always. And so being mindful about how you show up and the consequences that may come from you showing up authentically is something that I really encourage all of my students to be mindful of. But I also say you have to be your authentic self. And if you're in an environment that's not celebrating your authentic self and how you model professionalism, then that's something to question in a space that you might not be psychologically safe in. And so we're big on how to push that narrative, especially because modeling professionalism, I think, is really about how you show up, not just about how I look right now, but also about how I am engaging, right? I've seen many people in suits and blazers that are not acting professionally at all, in my opinion, right? Totally inappropriate behavior. And so really professionalism, especially for Gen Z and future generations, I think we're going to see that continue to evolve about what that looks like and how it looks. But modeling that, I think, is really for me, it's a tricky battle. But that is me personally. This is not the theory of Nate. This is Brittany as an individual. But that's just what I do as a liberated person. But I will gladly pass that to either of you as well.
Yes, Sherry.
Oh, yeah. I think it's always just interesting. Identity politics, generation, cultural, differences. I think probably one of the most important things I think that we can help our students by both modeling but also conversing about our thinking, kind of have like being transparent, is literacy, right? And not just literacy as far as like being able to read a book and decipher and understand it, but literacy as far as like how to navigate spaces, cultural norms, those other things, like I've seen, I think, and often there's always this extreme, people who are, ascribe to like identity politics and they're so tightly wound up with that. And I frequently, they talk about, like just how, young people should navigate the world. And we're just, I'm always sending them a picture of Dr. King being arrested each time in a suit with, and a tie, all the way to the other end where sometimes we have, folks who are just like, well, I should be able to be free to do whatever I want. And it's just like, well, you know what? That's also sometimes being illiterate as far as like what the space and culture and what it calls for in the moment. And so for me, I think is, I try to stay away from like hard, fast lines and really talk about like what's the, how to be the most literate and what's your end goal. If your end goal is to be able to, show up any kind of way, then that means, okay, then you have to like design the space that you're going to be in to fit that. It doesn't mean that you can necessarily go into other people's spaces and say, this is how. And it all depends. Like some things, it is a matter of freedom and liberation and expression. And sometimes it's ego. And so really just helping people be literate and understand that piece. And I'm fortunate as a young teacher, I didn't have, those kind of, like pressures from inside my school. But I remember going as a teacher who was effective in going to visit my friend's school, and the principal almost not wanting to let me in and say, you know, you shouldn't be anywhere without a suit and tie on. I'm like, well, that's too bad because I don't own one. You know, and so it was, you know, just seeing that, uh, you know, but also just recognizing that, you know, our youth are often policed on things that they, you know, wouldn't have to deal with if they didn't have curly hair and braids and, you know, and other just, you know, aspects of cultural expression and norms. So I think this is, again, literacy, but also cultural proficiency, that sometimes even within, you know, look, all skin folks ain't kin folks and all kin folks ain't kindred. So you can catch these barbs from all kind of spaces. But I think the idea of being literate and understanding what your end game is probably some of the most important. Now, I was Anshere's principal. Like, we probably had more dress down days, and I had other principals like, why you always got dress? I'm like, I don't care. Like, I'm like, my teachers are out teaching you like 10 times over. And so if they got jeans on, like I it just that wasn't something that was like in my, you know, that gave me anxiety. But I had a lot of peers and colleagues as school and district leaders who like they would start sweating when they just saw people dressed a certain way. But I'm just like, look at that instruction. Isn't that amazing? I don't care if they got dungarees on, you know? So
That's a perfect place to close, right? Look at that instruction. I want to make sure that everybody takes that forward, right? Focus on the focus on the actual content of what's what. And thank you again, Anshere and Sharif, for joining us today. We have one more juicy question in the chat that we won't get to, but I want folks to take it home about what does the community accountability look like in this work? Because all of us are part of a community that is likely pushing this work forward. And so as you leave this space, think about how you can focus on issues and move issues forward, impacting students of color, especially when thinking about solution building and repair. So thank you for raising that, Ashley. Thank you, Anshere and Sharif. I'm going to give it back to Gregory to close us out because we really are mindful of folks' time. We respect your time here at NAEP. And so we will close out within the next moment. So Gregory, I know you have a closing few words, and thank you all again. We really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody, all our guests, everybody who's participated, took their time out to be part of this conversation. I want to let everybody know that these kinds of conversations are part of an ongoing series. They're designed for members about issues that members are concerned with. And so we look forward to your participation and also your input. And so you'll be hearing from us, those of you who registered, those of you participated on this call, will get the links that were shared on this meeting and the recording and the slide deck for your reference. And certainly when we are approaching the launch of the member page refresh, please consider it and think about other roles that you can play within this community. So again, thank you very much for your time. And all of you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you all. Thank you, Jeanette. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Marita. Hey, Kevin Christian, I saw you were here. Great to see everybody.
Thank you, Brittany. Awesome conversation today. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Take care. Thank you so much.